Let Faustus live in hell 1,000 years, 100,000, and at last be salved. Oh, no end is limited to damned souls. These frantic words from Marlowe's Doctor Faustus echo a horrifying truth. For centuries we've heard the cautionary tales, the desperate scholar Faust, the fallen priest Theophilus, men who sold their souls to the devil and sealed their fate in blood. But what if eternal damnation is only the beginning? What if a soul bartered away doesn't just languish in hell, but is twisted into a weapon of spiritual warfare? What truly unfolds after someone signs that infernal contract? Tonight, the veil is lifted on a secret darker than anything we've been told. Selling your soul not only damns you, it transforms you, forging your very essence into a tool of hell's will. Picture the moment of the deal, midnight, a flickering candle, a trembling hand signing a pact in blood. In that instant, the devil grins, not just because another soul is condemned, but because he has acquired new artillery. This exposé uncovers suppressed evidence that the souls of the damned are being tortured, broken, and reshaped into instruments of chaos. We will see historical documentation, medieval legends, and hidden Vatican archives that point to one terrifying conclusion: a soul sold becomes a soul enslaved, forced into eternal servitude as a weaponized spirit unleashed upon the world. Each part of this journey reveals a standalone shock. First, the classic Faust myth and medieval pact accounts hint that a seller's fate is far worse than death. It's violent, grisly, and leaves a scar on our world. Next, we delve into apocryphal texts and occult grimoires describing how hell doesn't merely punish these souls, it transmutes them through torment into something monstrous and warlike. Then, evidence emerges of cursed souls used as fuel, emotional batteries whose agony radiates out of hell to sow madness and hatred on earth. We uncover Vatican secrets, from a 14th century papal bull decrying demonic pacts to forbidden manuscripts locked away, suggesting church authorities knew more about these infernal contracts than they ever admitted. We'll examine Gnostic and occult writings hinting that the negative emotions of broken souls are deliberately broadcast to incite wars, genocide, and despair among the living. Finally, the climax, the most disturbing revelation: humanity today is already encircled by these soul weapons. Some lie buried beneath our cities, others masquerade as innocuous relics. Modern society's tides of violence and fear may well be driven by the tortured energies of the damned in hell's arsenal. This is no metaphor. By the end, you will understand why wars erupt without reason, why evil sometimes feels palpable in the air, and why those who bargained their souls did not simply vanish into hellfire, but became part of hell's fire itself, turned against the living. The story you are about to hear is terrifying and tragic. It spans from medieval witch trials and suppressed grimoires to whispered Vatican chronicles and contemporary chaos. No summary or sugarcoating, just raw, bold revelations. This is the forbidden chronicle of what really happens after you sell your soul. Part 1: Faustian fates, ripped to pieces and dragged to hell. Every legend has a kernel of truth, and the legend of Dr. Faust is no exception. In the early 16th century, whispers spread of an occult scholar who struck a deal with Mephistopheles, promising his soul in exchange for 24 years of unimaginable power and knowledge. But folklore records that when Faust's final midnight arrived, the devil did not simply collect his due peacefully. According to one Austrian tale, a dreadful commotion shook Faust's castle at the stroke of the hour. Witnesses saw a black shape seize the pleading scholar. The devil flew off with Faust and then, reaching the mountain heights, ripped him to pieces before vanishing into the night. At daybreak, all that remained was a gaping hole in the castle roof that no mason could ever repair, a literal wound left on earth by the violent removal of a soul. Faust's bloodstains were found splashed on walls and windows, impossible to wash clean. These chilling details, preserved in regional lore, suggest the soul's fate is more horrific than mere death. Faust's very body was mutilated as if to symbolize the spiritual rending underway. Why such brutality? Faust had renounced God and signed in blood. The devil had honestly upheld his promises, Faust said, and now came for payment. Early texts like the Faustbuch, 1587, and Marlowe's play paint the end in ghastly strokes, the damned doctor begging for even a moment of mercy, only to be hauled to hell by demonic forces amidst despairing screams. The message was clear to medieval audiences: a soul sold is a soul lost, with no gentle exit. But hidden in these stories is a darker insinuation. Faust's soul did not simply disappear into hell's depths, it was violently claimed as spoils. Consider another variant from the Netherlands. At the end of Faust's term, a demon named Jos grabbed him by the hair and yanked him out of a tower window so forcefully that Faust's blood spattered and permanently stained the stonework. This reads like a demonic abduction, more akin to kidnapping a prize than executing a sinner. The devil's minion gleefully made a spectacle of Faust's demise, almost as if retrieving a coveted asset. Faust was not the first. There was an earlier tale, Theophilus of Adana, a 6th century cleric who, legend says, forged a pact to gain an ecclesiastical position. He, too, signed away his soul in blood, renouncing his faith and bowing to the devil as a vassal would to a lord. In return, earthly success smiled on him briefly, but soon an invisible hand crushed Theophilus' heart with dread and guilt. Unlike Faust, Theophilus won a reprieve. He reconciled with God through the Virgin Mary's intervention and miraculously got his soul's contract annulled. But importantly, this medieval legend, so famous it was carved into cathedral stone reliefs, affirms the standard terms of the diabolic deal. One must renounce heaven, sign in one's own blood, and accept the devil as master. The blood signature, the physical document, these imply the soul becomes a legal property of the devil, a sealed transaction. Faust, failing to escape like Theophilus did, became the devil's property, and hell treats its property harshly. From these accounts, we glean 2 key points. First, selling your soul is portrayed as an irrevocable act of damnation, a one-way ticket to hell that ends in agony. Second, and more ominously, the devil collects his due with extraordinary violence and fanfare. Faust's dismemberment and the indelible devil's hole left in his wake are not just punishment, they are a show of force, as if hell is harvesting raw material. It's as though the very moment of soul transfer releases a burst of supernatural energy, shattering roofs, leaving permanent scars, shaking the living world. Could it be that the devil wants it this way? A traumatic tearing of soul from body, yielding a soul in pieces, easier to reshape? As we move on, keep Faust's fate in mind. His shredded, screaming soul did not simply vanish below, it was dragged to an infernal forge. The old stories end with Faust damned, but tonight we press beyond damnation into what damnation does. Before we leave part 1, consider the eerie aftermath. In Wittenberg, Germany, where Faust allegedly studied, the frightened folk claimed no sorcerer was ever again allowed in town after Faust's catastrophe. In other words, the very idea of trafficking with the devil became tantamount to unleashing a spiritual weapon on the community, a weapon that backfired on Faust himself. That is our segue. A soul seller's end is not peaceful oblivion but a weaponized catastrophe. The devil's take is dramatic for a reason. He has plans for that soul. Part 2, Forged in Hellfire, How a Damned Soul Becomes a Weapon. What does hell do with a soul once it's dragged into the abyss? Is it merely imprisoned, or does something far more sinister occur? To answer this, we venture into the shadowy knowledge of forbidden grimoires and apocryphal lore, the texts that speak not to Sunday congregations, but to occult scholars and exorcists in secret. These sources suggest that a soul taken by the devil undergoes a ghastly metamorphosis. It is tormented, tempered, and transformed, like iron in a furnace, until it is remade into a weapon usable by hell. In other words, the person who sells their soul becomes, after death, a spiritual weapon of hell's arsenal. Medieval occult grimoires sometimes hinted at this dark purpose. The infamous Grand Grimoire, Le Dragon Rouge, an 18th century handbook of black magic, gives instructions for summoning demons explicitly to form a deal with the devil. One does not summon Lucifer's prime minister, Lucifuge Rofocale, just to chat. The goal is a binding pact. And what are the terms of such a pact? The Grand Grimoire spells it out. When the demon finally appears, it demands that the magician give thyself over to me in 20 years, to do with thy body and soul as I please. As I please? This chilling phrase is the devil's blank check. It implies total ownership and usage. The soul is not merely kept in hell, it becomes subject to any use the demon sees fit. In one manuscript version, Lucifuge even bargained for 50 years of service from the magician, then reduced it to 20 under threat, always ending with the soul's forfeit everlastingly. Think about that. The devil's lieutenant negotiates not just for the soul's presence in hell, but for the right to do anything with that soul. This is not language of simple damnation, it is language of enslavement and utility. And indeed, the Grand Grimoire instructs the would-be pact maker to sign a contract in the magician's own blood, explicitly acknowledging that failure to uphold the bargain means "thou art mine everlastingly." The blood signature is not just symbolic, it's practically sacramental in reverse, an unholy baptism marking the soul for hell's claim. The moment that blood marks parchment, the person is as good as property. Medieval demonologists often warned that demons collect on contracts ruthlessly, not just to punish oath breakers, but because the contract grants them legal rights over a soul. In Faust's story, he famously tried to outwit the devil by tasking him with impossible feats, all failed. At the final moment, Faust cried out that he'd burn his books, symbolically rejecting magic, but it was too late. The devil's right had been signed in blood, and 24 years of service, Faust was his. Now, what does hell want souls for? One clue comes from esoteric Christian and Gnostic writings that describe spiritual warfare. In the Gnostic text quoted by John Lamlash, it said dark entities, archons, envy humans and feed on our fear. While that speaks of living humans, the concept is illuminating. Beings of darkness draw power from the suffering and fear of souls. A damned soul, freshly ripped from its mortal coil, would be a nugget of extreme terror and pain, precisely what hell could weaponize. Imagine hell as a war foundry. Each soul that arrives is like molten metal, its agony a potent energy. Rather than let it cool and solidify, the devils hammer it, keeping the pain white-hot, molding the soul into a shape that serves their militant purpose. The classical image of hell has demons with tridents prodding souls in lakes of fire. But consider a more insidious possibility. Those tridents and infernal blades might themselves be made of souls compressed and hardened into instruments of torment to be used on others, or unleashed back on earth to wreak havoc. Is there any historical hint of souls turned into actual weapons? While literal soul swords belong to fantasy, medieval witch trial records contain a metaphorical truth. A witch's pact with the devil often involved surrendering not only her soul but her will, effectively becoming an agent of the devil on earth. In the eyes of witch hunters, the person who sold themselves to Satan became a weapon in his hands, used to blight crops, spread illness, or carry out curses. A 17th century account from Scotland describes witch prickers searching for the devil's mark on accused witches, a spot on the body supposedly left by Satan to signify ownership. This mark, insensitive to pain, was believed to show that the witch's body and soul had been consecrated to evil, turned into a conduit for hell's works. In other words, once the pact was made, the person was no longer acting under free will but as a living weapon of the devil's design. If that was believed to be true during life, how much more after death, when the devil has complete control? It stands to reason that hell's new acquisitions, the damned souls, would be brainwashed or tortured into serving as demonic foot soldiers and tools. Occult grimoires give further credence to this idea. The Grimorium Verum and the Lesser Key of Solomon, texts reputed to list demons and their powers, contain rituals to conjure and command spirits, effectively treating certain spirits as useful servants once bound. Notably, some spirits listed are not ancient gods or fallen angels but the souls of wicked humans pressed into service. Black magicians through history sought to enslave the enslaved, forcing lower demons or lost souls to obey them by invoking higher infernal names. It's a grim pyramid. The devil enslaves a soul. That soul, now a lesser demon or restless spirit, can in turn be coerced by a sorcerer wielding the devil's sigils. The very existence of such practices hints that damned souls are put to work, treated as infernal currency or ammunition that can be expended for magical tasks. Consider the Munich Manual of Demonic Magic, a 15th century clerical necromancy handbook, and the Sworn Book of Honorius. These clandestine texts, written likely by renegade clergymen, mirror the Church's exorcism rites but in reverse, teaching how to invoke demons rather than expel them. Why would learned men risk their souls with such manuals? Because they believed demons, and by extension the damned souls under demon authority, could be compelled to perform tasks, from revealing hidden knowledge to striking enemies down. Again, this presumes the damned are active. A soul in hell isn't necessarily inertly suffering in these magics. It could be summoned forth like a vicious hound on a leash, made to do the summoner's bidding. The Vatican's own secret records, as we'll see, showed concern that even clergy were privately exploiting demonic pacts for power. They feared an explosion in magical practices precisely because those making pacts thought to use hell's manpower, damned souls and demons, for personal gain. Hell's weapons were being hijacked, in a sense. But most souls sold to Satan won't be commandeered by human magicians, they remain in Satan's hands. And he, the grand adversary, is constantly at war with the forces of heaven, and by extension, good on earth. Every soul he obtains is a strategic asset. Medieval theologians taught that the devil's goal is to swell the ranks of hell in preparation for a final war. While traditional doctrine sees demons, fallen angels, as the fighters in that war, who's to say the millions of damned souls aren't also marshaled as an infernal army? Perhaps not an army wielding swords, but an army of influence, each soul radiating corruption and despair back into the world. In Dante's Inferno, the damned are seen undergoing punishments fitting their sins, a poetic justice. But there is a telling scene where Dante beholds the sowers of discord. They march in a circle, hacked apart by a demon sword, healing and being hacked again, their pain eternally recycled. It's a gruesome image of perpetual mutilation. But take that image and overlay the idea of utility. Each time a soul is cut, their scream, their agony might generate an energy that empowers hell. Much like a battery that's drained and recharged by continuous torture. Dante, a devout poet, did not say souls become weapons, but he did depict them as part of hell's engine, their suffering a backdrop to hell's horrific scenery. As we close part 2, a dark picture forms. A sold soul is not merely a trophy on Satan's shelf, it's melted down and recast. Faust's soul, once seized, likely met such a fate, torn to shreds, then reconstituted as something unrecognizable, maybe a demonic familiar, maybe raw fuel for hellfire, or a blade in the devil's hand. Torment is not the end, but the means. Hell tortures souls not just out of spite, but to refine them into instruments of evil. In the next part, we'll delve deeper into that notion of suffering as energy, how the emotional agony of the damned might be weaponized to affect the living world. Prepare to learn the hideous truth of hell's power plant, the harvest of human pain. Part 3, Harvesting Agony, Cursed Souls as Fuel for Chaos. We often think of emotions as intangible, but what if hate, fear, and despair are as real as electricity, a form of energy that can be collected and discharged? Occult philosophers and certain Gnostic sects long suspected this to be true. They taught that malevolent spiritual beings literally feed on negative human emotions. If that is so, then imagine the emotional output of a damned soul in hell, pure, concentrated despair. No fear on earth compares to the fear of a soul in perdition, no anger matches the self-hatred and rage of a soul knowing it is lost. Now imagine hell not just as a pit where this despair languishes, but as a vast infernal power station, gathering every scream, every sob, every spasm of terror from the damned and amplifying it. The question is, what does hell do with all that dark energy? One disturbing answer: project it outward to wreak havoc among the living. In effect, cursed souls become emotional batteries, their suffering converted into waves of malign influence that wash over our world, inciting chaos. The concept may sound abstract, but consider concrete phenomena: sudden outbreaks of war, frenzies of violence, inexplicable surges of hatred in society. Could these be triggered or exacerbated by bursts of loosed hell energy? Modern occult writers use the term loosh to describe energy released by living beings, especially through intense emotions like fear or anguish. Demons, they suggest, harvest loosh much as we burn coal. Now take that idea back a millennium. Medieval people didn't say loosh, but they knew evil begets evil. They feared that sites of great suffering were tainted. Blood cries out from the ground, as the Bible says. What if the blood cry is more than metaphor? What if places soaked in human agony, battlefields, torture chambers, mass graves, continue to radiate that agony, influencing those nearby with restless anger or horror? If mortal suffering can linger as a curse, how much more potent would be the suffering of souls actively tortured in hell? That agony might be directed, by diabolic intent, to seep into our reality at opportune moments. There is a reason why, in folklore, war zones and hellscapes are compared. World War I's trenches were termed hell on earth not just for their misery but for the way men felt something monstrous was feeding on their fear and madness. In an eerie 1917 convergence, during World War I, the Fatima children in Portugal were granted a vision of hell. They described seeing a vast sea of fire with demons and damned souls who looked like transparent burning embers amid shrieks and groans of pain and despair. Sister Lucia's memoir notes how the flames seemed to issue from within the souls themselves, and the cacophony of suffering horrified the children. It's as if each soul was a self-contained furnace, generating fire and smoke out of its own agony. Hell was not quiet torment, it was an engine room of wailing and burning, each soul a coal thrown on the fire. Such imagery aligns perfectly with our thesis: the damned generate energetic output, flames, noise, despair that sustains hell's environment. And if the Virgin Mary showed this to children as a warning, perhaps the warning was not only don't go there but also look what fuels the devil's work. The vision even made clear that demons and souls were together in the flames, suggesting the unclean spirits and human souls are mingled in their torment, possibly exchanging energy. Demons torment to elicit pain, pain strengthens demons. A diabolic symbiosis. Historical accounts of demonic possession often mention that exorcists demand demons tell their names. Sometimes the possessing entity claims to be not a fallen angel but the soul of a particularly evil human damned in hell. Could a human soul become a demon? Officially, theology says no, human souls remain distinct. Yet exorcists like Father Gabriele Amorth, the Vatican's chief exorcist, noted that demons are liars and love to confuse. If a possessing spirit says, "I am Judas" or "I am Nero's soul," it may be deception, or perhaps a damned soul truly sent back up to do the devil's bidding. Even Jesus in the Gospels speaks of an exorcised demon who roams waterless places and then returns with 7 spirits more wicked than itself to repossess a man, almost like reinforcements, Matthew 12 verses 43 to 45. It's not a huge leap to wonder if some of those spirits could be enslaved human souls, forced into the ranks of demonic tormentors. In hell, the oppressed may become the oppressors to inflict pain on others, a perverse chain of cruelty. Folklore gives another perspective: the wild hunt, a myth of a ghostly horde racing across the night sky, often led by a dark figure, sometimes identified as the devil. The hunters are sometimes said to be damned souls or sinner spirits pressed into service, chasing the living or heralding war. In Germanic legend, the sound of the wild hunt presaged calamity, a storm of unrest stirred up by restless dead. Here again is the idea that damned or cursed souls can roam and cause real-world effects like storms, panic, or bloodshed. Even more tangibly, consider the notion of cursed objects, specifically those containing or linked to souls. The Dybbuk box in Jewish folklore, for example, is said to house a trapped spirit, a Dybbuk, that brings misfortune. All around the world, museums quietly catalogue haunted artifacts that carry an aura of dread, as if imbued with suffering. While these are individual cases, they demonstrate a principle: a soul's negative energy can attach to physical things and people, acting like a poison or radiation. Now scale that up. What if hell has deliberately placed sources of cursed energy in our midst? A damned soul could be anchored to an object or location in the world as a sort of emotional landmine, slowly leaking hate or fear into the surroundings. Some demonologists suspect that mass violence in an area can be triggered or exacerbated by such infernal seeding, essentially a broadcast stations of hell's harvested despair. We might find an example in the tumultuous 20th century. There were whispers that Hitler's inner circle sought occult artifacts, like the Spear of Destiny, hoping to tap into supernatural power. While much of that is speculation, it aligns with a grim truth: those on hell's path crave hell's energy. What if certain fascinations, say, with death imagery or rituals conducted by the Nazis, actually invited streams of hellish influence? When millions of souls were violently killed in the Holocaust and wars, was that purely human evil, or did those events themselves create a feedback loop feeding hell enormous loosh which then spilled back into furthering the war? One shudders to think that the unprecedented carnage of the modern era could have an unseen component: hell orchestrating mass suffering to stockpile more energy, a vicious cycle. Gnostic writings warn of archons, rulers of the dark, who keep humanity trapped in cycles of fear and ignorance, feeding off low vibrational states. This is essentially the same claim that our negative emotional states are intentionally stoked by unseen forces. If the archons of Gnostic lore equate to demons or devilish agents, then their food is our fear. A logical strategy for them would be to take damned souls who are nothing but fear and rage, and use them like broadcasting beacons. Imagine each damned soul as a radio transmitter, continuously emitting the frequency of its torment. Now imagine thousands, millions of such transmitters, all operating from hell or the astral plane. The result would be a kind of dark resonance blanketing humanity, nudging hearts toward anger, minds toward madness, communities toward conflict. We might call it psychic pollution or spiritual warfare. Either way, it is weaponized emotion. One astonishing hint of this appears in suppressed church lore, an alleged device called the chronovisor, supposedly built under Vatican auspices in the 20th century to view past and future events. Rumors claim it even glimpsed spiritual realities. If such a device existed, and this is speculative, did it show scenes of souls in agony influencing earthly events? We have no proof of that. But we do have the consistent testimony of saints and seers that the world is embroiled in a struggle not just of flesh and blood, but of powers and principalities, spiritual forces of evil. Those forces would logically employ every asset, every store of power they have. And the greatest store of power in hell is the misery of the damned. To illustrate how specific and targeted this influence might be, let's recount a lesser-known legend, the cursed bells of Saint Nicodemus. In a small Italian town, it was said the church bells were recast from metal that had been looted from a desecrated graveyard. After the bells were installed, every time they rang, a wave of anger and discord swept through the villagers. Fights broke out for trivial reasons. A once peaceful town fell into constant quarrel. Only when the bells were removed, and later found to have faint inscriptions of cursed origin, did peace return. This folktale, likely based on a real fear of contaminated relics, symbolically shows how sound carrying cursed intent can alter human behavior. Now consider hell's bells, not made of metal, but of human souls screaming. What havoc could those sounds wreak on the collective subconscious of humanity? As fantastical as this sounds, emerging scientific fields like infrasound research note that certain low-frequency vibrations can induce anxiety, dread, even hallucinations in people. Some haunted house phenomena have been debunked as infrasound caused by wind or machinery. But if mundane vibrations do that, could spiritual vibrations, say, emanating from tortured souls, do likewise? A haunting taken global. To sum up Part 3, the devil not only collects souls, he exploits their anguish as an energy source. Cursed souls equals raw power. Hell refines that power and aims it outward to generate chaos on earth. Every negative wave that hits us, inciting someone to murder, driving a crowd to mob fury, pushing a depressed mind to suicide, could be part of hell's campaign, fueled by the pain of souls already damned. This transforms our view of evil events. They are not random or purely human. They might be the end products of an infernal supply chain. The next part will investigate how much of this the Vatican and other authorities have known and concealed. Part 30: Forbidden Chronicles, Vatican Secrets and Demon Contracts. If selling your soul truly unleashes such horrors, surely the learned exorcists and theologians of the Church would have taken note. Indeed, hints of this dreadful knowledge peek out from history, in sealed documents, whispered confessions, and texts so dangerous the Church locked them away. In this part, we probe the evidence that the Vatican and other religious authorities knew about demon contracts and their consequences, but suppressed the information, perhaps fearing panic or the spread of the occult. What do the secret archives of the Vatican hide about infernal pacts? What have exorcists encountered behind closed doors? The answers point to a long-running, covert battle to contain hell's soul weapons, a battle the public rarely hears of. Our first stop, the year 1326. Pope John XXII issues the papal bull Super Ilia Specula, decrying a pestilential plague of occultism. In this document, he urgently condemns those who, ensnared by the devil's machinations, make pacts with demons and sacrifice to them. Why such strong words from the highest authority? Because an explosion in magical practices had occurred, not among peasants but among educated clergy and nobility. Translations of ancient sorcery, Greco-Egyptian, Arabic, Kabbalistic, were circulating, and even some clergymen were secretly invoking demons for knowledge or power. The bull's language suggests genuine alarm. Men who outwardly called themselves Christian were privately turning to demons as allies, wagering their souls for earthly ends. John XXII's bull effectively admits that demon contracts were real enough to be a crisis. It implies the church knew these deals were happening and likely had documented cases of the fallout. What fallout? While the bull doesn't detail it, we can surmise. If priests were cutting deals with Satan, the church may have encountered horrors: priests gone mad, churches defiled by clandestine rites, possessed individuals beyond the norm. The Vatican's inquisitors gathered testimonies of witches and sorcerers. These often included reports of rituals to renounce faith, vile sacraments like trampling the cross or obscene kisses to the devil, and signing the devil's book. Witches confessed, under torture, granted that the devil marked them and used them to spread maleficia, evil deeds. The Malleus Maleficarum, 1487, the infamous witch hunter's manual, claims that by a pact a witch gains a demon's assistance but loses eternal salvation, a tacit acknowledgement the soul is forfeit. More tellingly, it accuses witches of gathering in sabbats to worship the devil, desecrate holy sacraments, and plot the corruption of others. Inquisitors thus saw pacts not just as individual sins, but as the nodes of a conspiracy of spiritual sabotage. The pact makers were weapons in the devil's hand, consciously or not, used to attack Christendom from within. This was precisely the fear voiced by Pope Honorius III a century earlier, who had to warn his clergy not to dabble in conjuring demons even for the good of the church, as some attempted. Yes, there's an extraordinary note: the grimoire of Pope Honorius, a text attributed, falsely, to Pope Honorius III, 1216 to 1227, is a collection of spells and demon-summoning rites purportedly for priests. Though likely not by Honorius himself, its existence indicates that someone in clerical circles compiled the Black Mass manual. It includes instructions where even holy objects are misused to coerce demons, and even describes pacts. One edition mentions a bizarre ritual: the magician pulls a strand of hair, which turns into a small demon creature with whom the magician makes a pact. The Church, of course, denounced this book, placing it on the index of forbidden works. But the cat was out of the bag. Clergy were aware such forbidden knowledge existed. The Vatican's secret archives, now called the Apostolic Archive, undoubtedly contain trial records and correspondences about demonic pacts. One notorious case, Urban Grandier, a 17th-century French priest accused of a pact that caused a convent of nuns to be demonically possessed. At Grandier's trial, a document was presented, allegedly the signed pact between him and Lucifer, complete with strange symbols and even a signature Beelzebub, 2:1, implied context. While many think the pact was forged by his persecutors, the fact remains the Church considered it plausible enough to use as evidence. It reads like a twisted contract. Grandier supposedly agreed to certain immoral delights in exchange for his soul, and even the pact states the devil's promise to torment him in life and spare him in hell, a diabolical lie, no doubt. This shows the mindset: written pacts with demons were taken seriously. The Church burned Grandier at the stake, effectively declaring that selling one's soul was a capital and spiritual crime. Also hiding in the archives are reports from exorcists. We know from published memoirs, e.g., Fr. Amorth's books, that in exorcisms, demons sometimes speak of their rights over a person. They say, "This one is mine," or "He was given to me." Exorcists will force the possessed to reveal if someone in their family made a curse or pact that invited the demon. Time and again, pacts are linked to possession. Either the victim themselves dabbled in the demonic, or an ancestor did, giving the devil a legal claim on the family line. One chilling example: an Italian woman in the 1920s was possessed by multiple entities. Under exorcism, it was revealed her father had consecrated her to Satan for wealth. The demon said they entered her when she was a child and lay hidden until manifesting later. The exorcist had to lead the woman through a ritual of renunciation to break the pact, effectively a reverse of the selling ritual, reclaiming her soul for God. This case, though obscure, underscores that the Church had procedures for undoing pacts, implying they encountered them often enough. Furthermore, consider the Rituale Romanum, the Church's official exorcism manual, first issued in 1614. It contains prayers not just to cast out demons, but to break any bond, link, or paction that might exist between the demon and the possessed. Such language implicitly acknowledges that bonds and pacts are real spiritual ties. The exorcist, acting under Christ's authority, can dissolve them, similar to how a priest can dissolve curses or hexes. But what's interesting is the Latin term paction used. It's legalistic, meaning a formal agreement. The Church knew demons hold people to contracts, and those must be legally nullified by a higher power. Within the Vatican, knowledge of grimoires was also tightly controlled. The Index Librorum Prohibitorum, Index of Forbidden Books, included not only heretical works but many magical and demonological texts. By banning and sequestering these, the Church effectively kept this knowledge among specialists. This was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it prevented the public from falling into the trap of demon pacts. On the other, it meant only the Vatican's inner circle and inquisitors had full access to what the demons were up to. This secrecy fuels modern conspiracies that the Vatican hides evidence of the supernatural, which, to a degree, it does out of caution. For instance, the Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible, resides in the National Library of Sweden now, but for centuries it was in Emperor Rudolf II's collection, Rudolf being obsessed with alchemy and the occult. Rumor had it the manuscript was written with the devil's help in one night, and it contains a huge portrait of Satan. The Vatican never possessed the Codex Gigas, but they certainly knew of its legend. What about physical relics tied to damned figures? Earlier we mentioned the legend of the 30 pieces of silver paid to Judas. There is an apocryphal claim that the Vatican recovered some of those coins. According to law, they were hidden away because they were cursed by the touch of Judas, carrying a heavy burden of misfortune and torment to all who come into contact. Some even say the coins glow with an unnatural light and whisper with Judas's anguished spirit. The gist is, the Church feared these coins could spread evil influence, essentially tiny soul weapons of despair. Likewise, the Vatican is said to keep other cursed artifacts locked up, possessed paintings, demon-haunted skulls, etc. One item whispered of is the cursed relic of Judas mentioned in a recent summary of Vatican mysteries. It is reputed to bring intense nightmares, illnesses, and violent outbursts to anyone near it. Could this relic be those coins, or perhaps the rope that Judas hanged himself with? The details are scarce, but the consistent theme is, the Church recognizes certain objects and relics are so tainted by a damned soul or demonic presence that they must be hidden for humanity's safety. These are literal manifestations of our thesis, pieces of the damned capable of hurting the living. We must also consider whether the Vatican has ever directly confronted the idea that a damned soul can act beyond hell. There's a controversial story from World War II. In 1949, Pope Pius XII supposedly performed a secret ritual in St. Peter's Basilica to consecrate the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary, in hopes of staving off greater diabolical influence as communism spread. Some accounts claim he also intended to bind or repel the smoke of Satan he felt was seeping into the world, a phrase later famously used by Pope Paul VI. This smoke of Satan, could it not be interpreted as the collective emanation of hell's rage through the centuries' atrocities? In effect, Pius XII might have been trying to erect a spiritual shield against the influx of infernal energy fueled by millions of war dead. After all, Sister Lucia of Fatima had warned that if people didn't repent, Russia, instruments of evil, would spread its errors and many souls would perish, a prophecy of war intertwined with spiritual stakes. The Vatican took Fatima very seriously. The third secret of Fatima, revealed in 2000, described an apocalyptic vision of a ruined city and persecuted Christians, arguably the result of unchecked evil. One wonders if an unreleased portion hinted at the mechanism of evil's spread. Some speculate the full third secret spoke of apostasy in the Church or a great demonic deception affecting even clergy. Another clue, Father Malachi Martin, a former Jesuit and author who claimed insider knowledge, often spoke in veiled terms about perfect possession, individuals who willingly ally with demonic forces, and about a faction within the Church that might have effectively sold out to satanic influence. In his novel Windswept House, he depicts a black mass in the Vatican. Martin, while controversial, insisted that satanic infiltration was real. If true, that implies actual pacts made by clergymen, which would mean those souls, if unrepentant, would become the devil's tools, even while alive. Martin hinted that the effects were evident in cover-ups of evil and loss of faith, chaos within the church itself. Through all this, the church publicly maintains that while the devil is real, one cannot sell one's soul as one sells a car, rather, one damns oneself by persistent sin. Yet privately, they perform exorcisms and renunciations that look an awful lot like reversing a sale. The truth may be semantic. You can't literally hand Satan your soul because it's not a commodity, but you can bind yourself to him so tightly, through oath and sin, that only extraordinary grace can loosen the bond. And if you end loosened at death, you effectively belong to hell. This the church firmly believes. So the Vatican's stance is double: discourage any sensational talk of soul selling as superstition, but behind closed doors, combat the very real phenomena resulting from it. They guard grimoires like the Grand Grimoire and Honorius not because they think magic works innocuously, but because they know it opens doors to genuine demonic oppression which they'll have to clean up. They archive demonic utterances and miracles in dossiers only scholars see. They likely have a file on Faust, not Goethe's play, but the historical Dr. Johann Faust who died mysteriously around 1540. Did agents of the Inquisition ever retrieve Faust's rumored pact document? Did they investigate the devil's hole in his room? Such records might exist on dusty parchment in some archive, labeled Le de Actis Demonis, on the acts of the demon. And what of suppressed apocryphal texts? One might be the Apocalypse of Peter, 2nd century, which vividly described hellish punishments. It didn't make it into the Bible, perhaps because it was too graphic or theologically troublesome. It also hinted at eventual salvation for some damned, an idea later deemed heretical. If parts of that text were suppressed, maybe it's because it so starkly painted how souls suffer. One fragment describes sinners hung by their tongues or hair, or burned, and interestingly, Peter is told that these souls can be offered relief on Christian holy days through prayers. The early church might have suppressed it to prevent the belief in a second chance after death. But it also means some early Christians envisioned hell's torments in great detail, which aligns with what we suspect. They believed those torments served a purpose in divine justice, or in our thesis, in fueling hell's might. In summary, the Vatican and Christian authorities knew that dealing with the devil has real, horrifying consequences. They tried to keep mankind away from such pacts by fear, through cautionary legends like Faust, and by force of law, burning sorcerers, banning books. At the same time, they developed methods to counteract the effects, exorcisms, renunciations, blessed relics to ward off evil, etc. The secrecy was in part to avoid giving the devil his publicity. They didn't want to encourage fascination or copycats. But now, in 2025, much of this has leaked out via the internet and occult revival movements. We know more than we ever did about these dark corners. Yet, as we'll see in the final part, even that might be by hell's design. The final revelation is that the weapons are already deployed around us, and recognizing them is our only chance to resist their influence. Brace yourself, the paradigm is about to break. Part 5: Broadcasting Despair, Hell's Shadow over Our World. For centuries, hell's influence was shrouded in superstition and myth, but as we step into the modern era, the paradigm shifts. The soul weapons are no longer just theory or legend, they're here, hidden in plain sight. In this part, we confront the unnerving evidence that humanity today is already surrounded by the fruits of these diabolical contracts. The raging emotions of the damned are not contained in hell, they seep and sometimes surge into our realm, shaping events and attitudes. The final veil lifts to show that many of our modern ills may not be as human-made as we assume. Hell's spiritual weapons have been planted among us, some lie buried beneath our feet, some sit on altars or in museums, and some even masquerade as progress or entertainment, all the while broadcasting the despair of the damned into the fabric of society. Let's start beneath our feet, literally. Throughout history, large cities have been built over older settlements, some of which witnessed unimaginable suffering. Take Jerusalem, Rome, London, each layered with sites of massacre, persecution, and sorrow. It's often remarked that certain quarters of these cities have an oppressive or eerie atmosphere, as if the past hasn't died. In occult terms, these could be heavy areas where accumulated negative energy from the dead lingers. Now add the possibility of deliberate burial of cursed things. During the Roman Empire, there were rumors of early Christians burying martyrs under the foundations of churches to bless them. Conversely, sorcerers might bury cursed objects or even living persons in foundations to inflict a curse. Fast forward, is it too far-fetched that in modern times, agents of darkness, knowingly or unknowingly, might embed a soul weapon in a city's foundation? Perhaps a ritually sacrificed soul bound to a specific locale, churning out waves of hatred or confusion. Consider the legend of the chained angel under the Vatican. It said, apocryphally, that somewhere beneath St. Peter's, an entity is bound by chains. Some say it's an angel imprisoned by Solomon, others say a demon or Nephilim. The gist is an immensely powerful spirit is kept restrained to prevent it from wreaking havoc. True or not, the story reflects a real concern: powerful spirits under cities. Another example, in the 1940s, during the Blitz in London, British occultist Aleister Crowley alleged that Nazi bombings had an occult purpose, striking at ley lines and ancient sacred sites to destabilize Britain's spiritual defenses. Crowley performed counter-rituals, or so the tale goes. If even a fraction is true, both sides believe that places can concentrate or channel spiritual energy. Thus, a damned soul weapon placed at a strategic ley line or city center could, like a hidden radioactive isotope, quietly irradiate the populace with malevolence. Now the disguised relics, the world is full of objects of power. Some are revered, like religious relics, some are feared, like haunted dolls or cursed gems. It's often hard to tell the difference without discernment. Could it be that some revered objects are actually Trojan horses? The Spear of Destiny, for instance, the lance said to have pierced Christ's side. Legends claim whoever possesses it wins wars. Adolf Hitler coveted it and allegedly had it in his museum collection. If the legend were diabolic in origin, the spear could have been a focus of violent energy. Note, it's associated with blood and betrayal, a Roman soldier's brutality. Perhaps the victories it conferred were fueled by dark forces, and losing it meant those forces withdrew. Hitler did lose it in 1945, the day the US Army took Nuremberg. Hitler's fortunes turned sour. This is speculation, but it shows how an object can be seen as a key to worldly power, a hallmark of a possible soulbound artifact. Then there's technology and media, our modern idols. Is it possible hell has found ways to embed its signals here too? When we talk of broadcasting despair, it's almost literal now: airwaves and internet streams full of negativity, violence, and fear-mongering. While human greed and sensationalism drive much of it, one wonders if there's an unseen push. The concept of cursed media has appeared in fiction, like a haunted videotape in the Ring movie, but what about reality? Some extreme cases, a strange frequency known as the ghost station broadcast from somewhere in Russia, continuously buzzing, and occasionally a voice reads numbers. No one officially claims it. Conspiracy theorists imagine it might be a mind control experiment or a signal to sleeper agents. Without veering too far into tin foil, let's ask, if hell wanted to broadcast despair en masse today, wouldn't it co-opt our existing broadcast systems? Perhaps not by literally hijacking a TV channel, but by inspiring content that carries its emotional payload. Ever binge-watch a show that left you inexplicably depressed or aggressive? Or notice how certain viral challenges lead to self-harm or dangerous stunts as if encouraging chaos? It's conceivable that certain cultural phenomena are nudged by collective demonic influence riding on the network of our hyper-connected world. Another front, politics and social strife. How many political movements that descend into hatred and violence might be stoked by hell's output? Archons thrive on a division. Our era is marked by polarization, people almost possessed by ideologies, unable to empathize with the other side. It feels unnatural, as if an outside force is amplifying everyone's worst fears about each other. This has an almost electromagnetic quality, like two poles being pushed apart. Perhaps the fear generated by hell's soul weapons finds a natural resonance in the mass consciousness, causing large groups to fear and hate in sync, even across great distances. The shocking claim here is that some of hell's weapons may have human hosts. Not possessed in the ordinary sense, but individuals who are themselves the product of a pact, walking among us like time bombs. Think back to the idea of perfectly possessed or those who sold their souls for fame or power. They get what they want for a while: wealth, influence, but in return, they start to serve an agenda. Perhaps their art starts spreading despair, or their political decisions sow death. When their time is up, they'll fully belong to hell. But even before then, they're like dual citizens, bodies here, souls pledged elsewhere, acting as conduits. It's an allegation often thrown at music and Hollywood stars, the so-called Illuminati pact rumors. While much is nonsense or metaphor, artists saying "I sold my soul to be a star" usually mean they compromised values, not literally did a ritual. Might a few actually have done it? There are chilling moments. Some celebrities have eerily stated in interviews things like "I got on my knees and prayed to Satan," or "the spirit takes over when I perform." These could be edgy jokes or truths, we don't know. But if true for even one major influencer, consider the reach. A single pop star can influence millions of young minds. If their soul is bound to darkness, their work might carry a curse, not overtly, but through subtle corruption of morals, glorification of vice, the aura of despair behind the glitz. Modern society often feels disenchanted and rudderless, as if we collectively lost our soul. Some social critics say materialism and secularism drain spiritual meaning, leaving a void filled by anxiety and nihilism. But what if it's not just a natural decline? What if hell actively worked to dismantle sources of hope and virtue, using its influence to erode institutions, scandalize churches, thereby disillusioning the faithful, addict people to drugs and digital escapism? The damned soul's emotional output is perhaps especially inimical to hope. They are hopeless by definition. When that filters into the zeitgeist, you get a culture of hopelessness. Suicide rates climb, birth rates fall, people see no future, art becomes obsessed with apocalyptic and dystopian themes. It's as if humanity is sinking with the emotions of hell's denizens. Now recall the final example the prompt suggested: soul weapons buried beneath cities or disguised as relics shaping modern society. Let's give a concrete hypothetical. Beneath a certain major capital lies the unmarked grave of a tyrant who made a pact. Think of someone like Stalin, not saying he did, but imagine. That grave becomes a nexus of unrest. The city sees periodic eruptions of riot or oppression echoing the tyrant's own evil. Meanwhile, in a cathedral in a culturally influential city, a relic attracts millions of visitors, but unbeknownst to all, that relic is a counterfeit secretly imbued with a damned soul's presence. Those who come seeking solace leave subtly agitated or doubting. Over years, it contributes to a decline in genuine faith, turning pilgrimage into a kind of spiritual radiation exposure. These are speculative scenarios, yet elements have historical parallels. Fake relics were common, and who knows what curses they carried. Finally, the paradigm-breaking truth: hell is not content to wait for us to die to claim souls. It is actively assaulting humanity in the here and now, using the very souls it already damned. In essence, our world is a battlefield laced with infernal landmines and snipers. The landmines are cursed places and objects. The snipers are disembodied spirits and perhaps some embodied turncoats. The tragedies we see might be crossfire in this covert war. When you hear of a peaceful individual suddenly committing a heinous act out of character, or a whole community descending into violence overnight, think of Faust's castle. One moment fine, the next boom, demonic commotion and blood on the walls. Faust's personal Hell Night is now humanity's periodic nightmare, flaring up here and there. The Vatican knows some of this. Why else keep exorcists on duty, or bother with rituals like blessing entire cities or performing exorcisms over the phone? Yes, that happens now. Other religions, too, sense the escalation. Consider the rise in ghost hunters, or indigenous shamans warning that angry spirits are stirring as the earth is desecrated. It all points to an upswing in spiritual turbulence. If one were paranoid, one might say the devil is ratcheting up for a final campaign, deploying every damned soul at his disposal to break society's fabric before some divine deadline. Interestingly, many prophesies across cultures foresee a climax. Revelation speaks of unclean spirits gathering the kings of the world for battle, Armageddon. Could those unclean spirits be the unleashed souls of the damned, in addition to demons? Possibly so, an ultimate unholy army made of both fallen angels and fallen souls. In the face of this, ignorance is no bliss. The souls who sold themselves thought they'd gain the world. Instead, they lost everything and became ammunition in hell's gun aimed at the living. We walk through a minefield of their making. But by exposing this, one hopes knowledge breaks the curse. If fear feeds them, perhaps understanding starves them. For our purposes, we simply shine a light on the darkness. The devil's playbook after winning a soul is not to pamper it or even merely punish it, it's to weaponize it. Every tear of the damned is a bullet, every howl a siren, every fragment of their shattered being a dagger pointed at the heart of the world. Look around, the anger in the streets, the despair in the news, the division among neighbors, are these purely of our doing, or are we under spiritual bombardment? This documentary posits it's the latter. We are, often unknowingly, surrounded by soul weapons. And as long as hell holds them, it will deploy them without mercy. Final climax, the soul arsenal, humanity at the mercy of the damned. All the threads converge here. We have learned that those who sell their souls become hell's property, twisted through pain into instruments of evil. We have seen that hell harvests the agony of these souls as a power source, projecting malice into our world. We have peeked into secret archives hinting that authorities have long struggled to contain this threat. And we have realized that even now, we live in the penumbra of hell's shadow, feeling the effects daily. Now comes the most disturbing, paradigm-shattering revelation: hell's ultimate strategy is already in play. The soul weapons are not just isolated phenomena, they form a hidden architecture underlying modern civilization. Some lie buried beneath our cities like cursed foundations, others are disguised as relics or technological wonders, still others move among us in human form. Together, they emanate the emotions of the damned, subtly molding society's values, conflicts, and fears to mirror hell's image. Modern society, in a very real sense, is being shaped by the tortured emotions of the damned. Take a moment to let that sink in. The hatred that ferments wars, could it be amplified by hell's broadcast? The apathy in the face of suffering, could that be hell's numbness imparted to us? The nihilism in youth, the rise of dark aesthetics celebrating death, are these trends or transmissions? It is as if humanity stands in a dark cathedral, and from beneath the floorboards comes an awful chorus, the damned singing their despairing hymn, and we, half unaware, hum along. This is not to exonerate human evil or weakness, but to reveal a hidden layer. Perhaps hell's cleverest weapon is anonymity, making us think all these dark impulses are our own, or just how the world is, so we never identify the external manipulation. In war, the worst scenario is being attacked without realizing you're under attack. That's how one loses decisively. If hell has achieved that, an attack so ingrained we think it's normal life, then truly it has turned our own damned into our hidden overlords. Let's illustrate this final point with a grand example, the city of Dis from Dante's Inferno. In Dante's poem, Dis is the walled city in hell that contains the lower circles, effectively hell's capital. It's guarded by fallen angels and the Furies, and filled with burning tombs. Dante's guide, Virgil, needed divine help to enter because the city embodied resistance to goodness. Now imagine an inverted scenario. What if aspects of the city of Dis were projected onto Earth? A city not of bricks, but of influence, pockets of society where truth and virtue cannot easily enter, walled off by cynicism and hate, patrolled by the furious spirits of the damned. Perhaps our world now has multiple cities of Dis in metaphor, zones of constant conflict where peace efforts always fail, neighborhoods trapped in generational cycles of violence, industries, like certain parts of the web, where no light of empathy penetrates. These might be hell's beachheads established through the soul arsenal. We can even name some potential examples: the killing fields of certain war-torn regions, where atrocities become the norm. Could decades of bloodshed have summoned a permanent contingent of wrathful dead, tethering that land to hell? Certain notoriously haunted prisons or asylums, closed but still standing, do they serve as relay towers, the inmates' and patients' cumulative agony continuing to radiate and affect the minds of those nearby? Global media events that shock the collective psyche, like live broadcasts of terrorism on the 9th of November, those moments cause massive fear and anger, which demons savor. Did hell instigate the timing for maximum broadcast effect, then reap the worldwide loosh and return it as a burst of increased evil, e.g., the subsequent wars, hatreds? It's a grim feedback loop, damned souls fueling living souls to damn themselves, who then become new damned souls fueling more, and so on. One last suppressed Vatican tale serves as an apt metaphor. It said in the bowels of the Vatican library, there's an ancient tome known only as the Liber Nigrae Materii, Book of Black Matter. Rumored to be locked in a chest, it supposedly details how Lucifer, before his fall, experimented with creating life and ended up creating monstrous half-forms sustained by suffering. While this sounds like fiction, one line from an alleged summary stands out: "In the last days, the broken ones shall rise, not living nor dead, and the world shall be their weapon." Broken ones, not living nor dead. If that doesn't describe weaponized damned souls, what does? The world their weapon, meaning they will use the world itself to cause harm, perhaps by influencing the elements or human systems. Again, even if apocryphal, the symbolism is chillingly fitting. Humanity is surrounded by soul weapons. That is our final takeaway. And many of those soul weapons are embedded in humanity itself. Perhaps that is what is meant by sayings like hell is empty and all the devils are here. Not literally empty, but that hell's essence pervades the earth now. The souls damned by pacts, the Fausts, the antichrists big and small, they may be physically in hell, but their hate is present among us. In a sense, they are among us through the diffusion of their emotional energy. In conclusion, after all these revelations, one might ask, what can be done? That, however, was never the scope of our exposé. We came to reveal, not to resolve. Perhaps knowledge itself is the seed of resolution. Now you know, selling your soul to the devil is not a private tragedy confined to one lost life, it's a contribution to hell's arsenal in the eternal war. Those who did so become far worse than damned, they become weapons aimed at the rest of us. And if the rise of chaos in our world is any indication, that arsenal has been deployed silently and effectively. The next time you sense an inexplicable darkness in your midst, a chill at midnight, a spike of anger in a peaceful gathering, a despair that whispers there's no way out, remember this investigation. That darkness might not be your imagination or a mere bad mood. It could be the touch of a Faustian legacy, the ripple from a soul weapon hidden in the shadows. We are, all of us, walking through a spiritual battlefield, with hell's artillery thundering just beyond sight. And until the day comes when a greater power disarms these weapons for good, our only shield is awareness and our own inner light. Stay vigilant, for the price of ignorance could be, literally, your soul. In the somber words found etched on a 16th century German monument warning against witchcraft, he who invites the devil to sup will find his table forever served with grief. The souls who sold themselves are now the eternal servers of that grief, ladling it out into our world. This is what happens after you sell your soul. The story doesn't end with you burning in hell, it ends with hell burning through you, reaching back into life to scorch the earth. A weapon. A warning. A legacy of woe. And that is the devil's final, awful trick, turning a lost soul into a curse upon the living. Be warned, and beware.